Good morning, world history. Today we are going to talk about Christianity and the role of the church and the role that this plays in the Middle Ages. I know we've talked a bit about religion before and how it affects different cultures and what it plays, but Christianity particularly plays a large role in Europe and what they go through and what they deal with. So that's what we are going to talk about in this video and in this screencast here. Okay, religion we've talked about before. One of the major things that it does in culture is it brings people together. Okay, it is a common factor, it is a uniting thing. So one of the major things that happened here with these barbarian tribes is that they wanted to be very much like the Romans, okay? And because they wanted to be like the Romans and they didn't really know how to be like the Romans, and it was the only thing they really knew because the Romans came in and took over them, they adopted one of the things that the Romans had. And the Romans, right there at the end, remember they began polytheistic, which means they believed in many gods, but at the end, with Constantine changing over to Christianity, they became Christian like the Romans did, and the Romans adopted the Roman Catholic religion, okay? And so they wanted to be like the Romans, and so they adopted the same religion more or less like the Romans did, like they did, and they became Roman Catholic as well. But they didn't really know how to do it, and so some adopted it and some didn't, but it became a uniting factor on how they brought people together. Okay, and so a couple of the barbarian tribes used this to bring people together because there was a lot of different, especially geography that kind of separated people, a lot of different cultures that separated people, and so they'd use this as a way to bring all of their different people together. And one of the kings that really used this to his benefit was the great king Charlemagne. Okay, Charlemagne was the head of the Frankish people, okay, the Franks. All right, and Charlemagne is France, okay? It's French for Charles the Great, Charlemagne, okay? You can kind of see Magne or great in there, Charles the Great, okay? And he became the very first kind of Christian king, all right? And he used this to kind of bring his people together. So he said, all right, I will make my kingdom Christian. All right, so he used this to bring his people together. And what he did is he said, I will recognize the head of the Roman Catholic Church, which is the Pope. I will recognize him as the official leader, okay? And then he will recognize me as a Christian king. So the Pope officially recognized Charlemagne and gave him control over a bunch of different little kingdoms and named it the Holy Roman Empire. So he gave him the title, the Holy Roman Emperor, though it wasn't really an empire, it wasn't Roman, and for the most part, it wasn't really holy. Okay, so he gave him the title, the Holy Roman Emperor, which really didn't mean a whole lot, except for the fact that it was the Pope officially recognizing Charlemagne, and then Charlemagne officially recognized the Pope's power, which then gives him this term, it legitimized him, which means it gave the Pope power. Okay, so Charlemagne recognizes the Pope. That's this guy with this funky looking hat here, okay? And the Pope recognizes Charlemagne. That's why the Pope is then crowning Charlemagne here, okay? So that's why then from that on in the Middle Ages, anytime a king came to power, they were then crowned by a church leader, okay? By the clergy. That's what a clergy is. A clergy is a church leader. Okay, what this did then is it made the church important in Europe. And that's very important to understand. It made the church powerful. Okay, it made clergy, church leaders, as important as nobles. And remember in our social hierarchy, nobles are just under the king in that social hierarchy, because it gave them land, which is power, gave them money, which is also power, and gave them power, which is power, right? It also made them advisors to the kings, all right? So what does this ultimately do? What kind of role does this give them? Okay, well, first and foremost, ultimately, what are people looking for at this time? Well, they're looking for a safe place, right? That's why feudalism was created, because the peasants at this time were looking for a safe place to live. Okay, so the church became a safe place. All right, so they became a safe place to live. For men were created monasteries. That's where monks lived, right? So this is kind of a monastery, a place where they could go and dedicate themselves to the Lord and live for the rest of their lives. They gave up all their monetary possessions, so like anything that they owned, but they were given a safe place to live. And then convents for women, that's where they could go and be nuns. But if a woman couldn't find a husband, or if their family had too many daughters and they couldn't worry about trying to find them a place to live, they would be a burden on their family, but they could send them to a convent and they would be safe and protected for the rest of their lives. And that's more important than having freedom for a lot of these people, is knowing that you're going to be protected for the rest of your life, that you're going to have somewhere safe to live, that you know where your next meal is going to come from. And that's where the church came in. It was a safe place for a lot of these people. Okay? For a lot of the clergy members, really, once again, that big thing here is they were protected. Okay? Because they were elevated to that role just under the kings, they were given that role of the nobles, they were protected by lords and kings. Okay? The clergy were protected by the lords and kings. That's really important. And they even held the same rank as lords. Bishops and cardinals, and especially the Pope, held high-ranking positions. That's really important. They held these high-ranking positions that gave them power, that gave them land, that gave them money. Now, later we're going to talk about how they became corrupt, and that became a problem. But in the beginning of the Middle Ages, that's big, because if you started out as nothing, well, then you pretty much stayed nothing, unless you became a part of the church. You had a chance then to start out as nothing and become something in your life. The church gave you social mobility, and that happened nowhere else in the Middle Ages. Okay? They also were the most educated people. In fact, some nobility, even Charlemagne himself, could not read or write, but in the church, you could. Okay? Very few people could read or write. This is part of the reason we call it the Dark Ages, right? Very few people could read or write. It's like 10 steps back from Rome, right? And all the religious texts were in Latin, right? Rome, okay? Roman Catholic, all of it was in Latin. All of the church are the gatekeepers here. They're the ones who hold the word of God, okay? If you want to get to God, you have to go through the clergy. They're the ones who are reading the word of God to you. And they literally are the only ones who can read the Bible, or the ones that can write the holy books. And that's what a lot of people did in these monasteries, is they would write copies of the Bible. Remember, everything is handwritten at this time. Okay? They also would do then inside of churches, because most people can't read or write, they would then create in the stained glass windows all those Bible stories, right? Since people can't read or write, what they would do is they would make these beautiful Bible stories out of these stained glass windows, so that at least people could see what they were talking about. I also kind of think where it was, if people got bored during church, they could at least have something pretty to look at. But I think that's a personal opinion. So this is kind of a glimpse into what the role of the church was during the Middle Ages, and we're getting kind of into how they played and what they did in what the Middle Ages looked like and how they affected the people at that time.